The scent of wisteria, heavy and sweet on the humid Virginia air, mingled with the comforting aroma of old leather and beeswax. This was the olfactory signature of Magnolia Grove, our family's sprawling 200-acre estate. It wasn't just a by-deed collection of buildings and land. It was a living, breathing chronicle of Ainsworth history, a working farm with a grand, if slightly faded, antebellum manor, undulating pastures that rolled towards the hazy Blue Ridge Mountains, and a small, critically respected vineyard established by my visionary great-grandfather. My name is Clara Ainsworth, and for all of my 28 years, Magnolia Grove had been my compass, my sanctuary, a world meticulously presided over by my indomitable, fiercely intelligent grandmother, Evelyn Ainsworth. Grandmother Evelyn was the undisputed matriarch, the custodian of generations of Ainsworth legacy. She'd managed Magnolia Grove with an astute business mind, a pragmatic farmer's intuition, and an unwavering will of iron. Her love for the land was palpable, matched only by her profound, often caustically expressed disdain for avarice and incompetence. She had, for reasons I only vaguely understood in my youth, seen a kindred spirit in me. Her quiet, observant granddaughter who found more solace in the estate's vast, dusty library and the cyclical rhythms of the agricultural seasons than in the brittle social ambitions of my other relatives. These included my perpetually aggrieved Aunt Carol, her ingratiating sycophantic husband, Uncle Mark, and their two vapid, thoroughly entitled adult children, my cousins Jason and Brittany. This land, Clara, it has a heartbeat. Grandmother Evelyn would often tell me, her piercing blue eyes, the exact shade of a summer storm brewing over the mountains, fixed on the distant, undulating horizon. Most people these days, they're too busy chasing dollars, too deafened by their own clamor to hear it. You listen, child. You always listen. She didn't just impart wisdom, she taught me the practicalities, the nuances of crop rotation for the hayfields, the subtle art of discerning wine vintages, the critical importance of treating the estate's dedicated, long-serving staff not as employees, but as an extension of our own family. It was an unspoken covenant between us, a truth as deeply rooted as the ancient magnolia trees lining the main drive, that I, not her socially ambitious daughter Carol, or her feckless, opportunistic son-in-law, would be the one entrusted to shepherd Magnolia Grove into its next chapter. The vultures, as Grandmother Evelyn had acerbically termed them, began to circle with increasing boldness when her formidable constitution started to falter after her 80th birthday. Aunt Carol and Uncle Mark, whose lives revolved around a sterile, oversized McMansion in a soul-crushingly bland Richmond suburb, suddenly developed an overwhelming, almost suffocating concern for her well-being. They became near-permanent fixtures. At the Grove, their solicitousness so transparently artificial it was almost comical. Jason and Brittany, both in their early 20s and already exuding an offensive aura of unearned superiority, would drape themselves by the pool, making thinly, veiled, snide remarks about the charming antiquity, their euphemism for dilapidated, of the manor house and its endearingly rustic, red, outdated furnishings. Grandmother Evelyn, though physically weakened, her movements increasingly tentative, remained mentally as sharp as a freshly honed scythe. One sweltering July afternoon, she summoned me to her bedside. Her voice, usually so resonant, was now a thin, papery whisper, yet her eyes held a spark of their old, unyielding fire. "They're waiting, Clara," she rasped, her gaze locking with mine. "Like buzzards on a fence post, just waiting for me to draw my last breath. Don't you dare let them tear it apart. Magnolia Grove is yours. It's all in the will." "The lawyers, Mr." She reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly firm, her skin cool and dry. "Be smart, child. Be smarter than they think you are." Those words became my shield, my mantra, in the turbulent weeks that followed her peaceful passing a few short weeks later. The reading of the will, a somber, tense affair conducted in the oppressive formality of the main drawing room, was presided over by Mr. Alastair Davies, the family's longtime attorney. He was a man whose professional loyalty, I would soon discover to my profound dismay, was as flexible and self-serving as a politician's promise. As Grandmother Evelyn had indicated, and to the barely concealed apoplectic fury of Aunt Carol, Magnolia Grove, its vast lands, its thriving agricultural and viticultural operations, and the substantial bulk of the Ainsworth liquid estate, was bequeathed solely and unequivocally to me, Clara Ainsworth. Aunt Carol and Uncle Mark received a comfortable, but in their grasping estimation, insultingly modest trust fund. Jason and Brittany were each granted token bequests, sums they clearly considered beneath their dignity. The inevitable explosion erupted later that evening, after Mr. Davies had made his discreet departure. Aunt Carol shrieked, her carefully made-up face mottled with an unbecoming shade of puce. Mother was clearly not in her right mind. She was manipulated. You, Clara, with your nose perpetually stuck in a book and your head in the clouds, you can't possibly manage an estate of this complexity and magnitude. It's a financial disaster waiting to happen. Uncle Mark, ever the master of oily insinuation, adopted a more superficially conciliatory, yet equally insidious tone. Clara, my dear, he began, placing a proprietary hand on my arm, your aunt is understandably upset. We all are by this surprising turn of events. But she does have a valid point. Running Magnolia Grove is a monumental undertaking. The intricate finances, the diverse staffing requirements, the complexities of the vineyard and its distribution network. It's a full-time, high-pressure business, requiring a certain, shall we say, aggressive acumen. This was the opening salvo of their relentless psychological campaign. For weeks, I was subjected to a constant, suffocating barrage of doubt, fear-mongering, and outright manipulation. They would corner me at every opportunity, in the hallways, during meals, even invading the sanctity of the library, with dire tales of impending financial ruin, of labyrinthine tax laws I couldn't possibly hope to comprehend, of unscrupulous developers and ruthless competitors who would undoubtedly cheat me blind. They meticulously painted a portrait of me as a fragile, naive, incompetent waif, utterly incapable of handling the immense pressures and responsibilities of such a vast and multifaceted inheritance. They proposed the formation of an oversight committee meant to consist, naturally, of Aunt Carol, Uncle Mark, and their son Jason. Brittany, it seemed, was deemed too intellectually lightweight even for their sham operation, which would assume complete operational control of Magnolia Grove. Clara would retain nominal ownership, a figurehead role, they benevolently termed it, and would, of course, receive a generous annual stipend for my troubles. It's purely to protect you, Clara, darling, Aunt Carol cooed, her eyes glittering with an emotion that bore no resemblance to genuine concern. Mr. Davies, their obsequious legal puppet who was also unconscionably supposed to be acting as the executor of my grandmother's estate, enthusiastically endorsed their scheme. It's a very sound and prudent proposal, Clara, he'd intoned. During a particularly fraught meeting, his gaze studiously avoiding mine. It simplifies matters considerably from an administrative standpoint, protects the core assets of the estate from potential mismanagement or inexperienced decision-making. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that it was a meticulously crafted trap. I knew their ultimate goal was to systematically strip me of my inheritance, sliver by insidious sliver, until I was left with nothing but an empty title and a bitter taste of betrayal. Grandmother Evelyn's final words echoed in the chambers of my mind. Be smart, child. And in that crucible of grief and pressure, an idea, audacious, perilous, and utterly terrifying, began to take root. My official employment was as a research assistant at the University Library in nearby Charlottesville, a quiet, unassuming job that perfectly suited my introverted temperament. But for several years, driven by an innate curiosity and a love for precision, I dedicated my spare evenings to taking online courses in paralegal studies. I'd become fascinated by the intricate dance of legal language, the subtle power of well-crafted clauses, the way words on a page could shape reality. It had been a private intellectual pursuit, a stimulating mental exercise. Now, it might very well be my only lifeline. All right, I said one evening after yet another week of their relentless, soul-crushing pressure, carefully feigning a weary, almost broken resignation. If you all truly, genuinely believe this is what's best for Magnolia Grove, for grandmother's legacy, I'll consider it. But I need to understand every single word. This is a huge commitment. Aunt Carol and Uncle Mark exchanged almost imperceptible yet palpably triumphant glances. Uncle Mark, with a theatrical flourish, produced a thick document, nearly an inch in depth, bound in a formal, intimidating legal blue cover. But of course, my dear Clara, take all the time you need. We want you to be completely comfortable. Mr. Davies drafted it himself. I retreated to the sanctuary of the vast, silent library at Magnolia Grove, the weighty agreement clutched in my trembling hand. It was precisely what I had anticipated. A dense, impenetrable labyrinth of legalese, jargon-filled clauses, and cleverly disguised power grabs, all designed to effectively and irrevocably sign away all my decision-making authority, all my financial control, leaving me with a demeaning pittance and the hollow illusion of ownership. They had, as Grandmother Evelyn predicted, profoundly underestimated me. They had assumed I'd be too intimidated by the sheer volume of the document, too overwhelmed by grief, or simply too intellectually outmatched to scrutinize its contents with any real diligence. For 3 consecutive days and most of the intervening nights, I barely slept. Fueled by black coffee and a desperate, burgeoning resolve, I dissected every clause, every subparagraph, every seemingly innocuous footnote. I cross-referenced definitions, researched obscure legal precedents, and highlighted every potential loophole or ambiguity. And then, with a surge of adrenaline that was equal parts terror and exhilaration, I began to meticulously craft my own edition. It had to be a masterpiece of subtlety, a Trojan horse of a sentence, something that they and their complacent, overconfident lawyer would almost certainly overlook in their unseemly haste and arrogant self-assurance. It had to sound like standard, almost tedious legal boilerplate, yet contain within its carefully chosen words the irrefutable seeds of their eventual and hopefully spectacular undoing. My addition would be a single, precisely worded sentence, strategically inserted at the very end of a particularly dense and mind-numbing subparagraph concerning financial oversight and quarterly reporting protocols. Using the library's e-by-r sophisticated computer and a high-quality laser printer, I painstakingly reformatted a single page of their voluminous agreement, page 17, as fate would have it. I meticulously typed my sentence, selecting a font type, size, and spacing that perfectly, indistinguishably, matched the original document. Addendum C, the Evelyn Ainsworth Legacy and Land Stewardship Charter, of course, did not exist anywhere within their original draft. I would create it. It would be a deceptively simple, single-page document, typed with the same meticulous care, outlining Grandmother Evelyn's most deeply cherished, non-negotiable core values for the future of Magnolia Grove: the unwavering preservation of its historical and architectural integrity, the implementation and maintenance of demonstrably sustainable and ethical farming and viticultural practices, the absolute commitment to fair wages, benefits, and long-term employment, security for all estate staff, particularly those with long tenures of service, a dedication to meaningful community engagement and local philanthropy, and most crucially for my purposes, an absolute and unequivocal prohibition against subdividing, selling, or leasing any portion of the original 200-acre estate for purposes of purely speculative commercial or residential development. These were all principles she had passionately and repeatedly drilled into me over many years, principles that my greedy, short-sighted relatives would undoubtedly, and with predictable alacrity, violate in their rapacious pursuit of quick, easy profits. The day of the signing was an exercise in suppressed terror. We convened in Mr. Davies' oppressively stuffy, book-lined office in downtown Charlottesville. Aunt Carol was practically vibrating with ill-concealed anticipation, her fingers drumming impatiently on the polished mahogany table. Uncle Mark wore his most oleaginous, self-satisfied smile. Jason predictably looked both bored and deeply smug. Mr. Davies inquired, his hand already hovering over his ornate fountain pen, an air of perfunctory dismissal in his tone. "Yes, Mr. Davies," I replied, my voice deliberately quiet, almost meek. "It's remarkably thorough, very comprehensive. May I just have a quiet moment alone to look it over one last time?" Aunt Carol let out an audible huff of impatience, but Uncle Mark, ever eager to play the role of the benevolent, understanding patriarch, interjected smoothly. "But of course, my dear girl. Take all the time you need. It's a momentous occasion. We'll just step out and grab a quick cup of coffee from the deli downstairs." This was the critical moment I had gambled everything on. As soon as the heavy office door clicked shut, behind them my hands, slick with nervous perspiration, flew into action. I carefully extracted the original page 17 from their document and, with fingers that trembled despite my best efforts at control, substituted my meticulously crafted replacement page. With a tiny, almost invisible dab of archival quality glue stick, I affixed my newly typed Addendum C, my concise single-page list of Evelyn Ainsworth's inviolable legacy principles, to the back of my new page 17, folding it neatly and precisely so it appeared to be an official, albeit perhaps casually overlooked, attachment. I then carefully reinserted the altered page into the voluminous agreement. The document was so thick, so intimidatingly dense, that one additional page, especially one with an addendum seemingly tucked in as an afterthought, would, I prayed, go entirely unnoticed in their triumphant haste. When they returned, reeking faintly of stale coffee and self-congratulation, I signed the agreement with a pen that felt as though it weighed 1,000 pounds. They each appended their signatures with ostentatious flourishes. Mr. Davies, with a booming sound that seemed to seal my fate, notarized the document, his official stamp thudding onto the page with an air of irrevocable finality. He handed me a neatly collated bound copy, and Uncle Mark took possession of the original, patting it possessively as if it were a winning lottery ticket. "Well done, Clara," Uncle Mark intoned, his voice oozing false sincerity. "You've made a truly wise and courageous decision today, for everyone involved." The subsequent 6 months were a descent into a private living hell. The Ainsworth Family Management Committee, as they now grandly styled themselves, descended upon Magnolia Grove with the rapaciousness of a swarm of locusts. Their very first official act was to summarily dismiss several long-term, deeply loyal staff members, men and women who had served my grandmother faithfully for decades, who were the repository of generations of institutional knowledge, replacing them with cheaper, inexperienced, and frankly, indifferent contract labor. They immediately, and with no consultation, jacked up the prices at the vineyard's popular tasting room and canceled several long-standing community events, swiftly alienating loyal local customers and damaging years of carefully cultivated goodwill. Then began the more egregious violations. They entered into serious advanced negotiations with a notoriously aggressive out-of-state development corporation regarding the sale of a pristine 50-acre parcel of woodland, a beautiful, ecologically sensitive area bordering the Shenandoah National Park, for the construction of a sprawling luxury housing development, a blatant, undeniable violation of the no subdivision for speculative development principle enshrined in my secret Addendum C. They authorized the clear-cutting of a significant section of irreplaceable old-growth hardwoods on the estate's western boundary to facilitate a rushed, ill-conceived expansion of the vineyard with trendy, high-yield, but ultimately inferior grape varietals, completely ignoring all established principles of sustainable forestry and agricultural practice. Precious, irreplaceable heirloom furniture and artwork from the manor house began to discreetly disappear, presumably sold off, replaced by soulless, generic modern pieces that screamed of bad taste and quick cash. Throughout this agonizing period, I became a ghost in my own ancestral home, a silent, grieving observer. But beneath the facade of defeated resignation, I was a meticulous archivist of their malfeasance. I documented everything. I took time-stamped photographs of the clear-cutting, the disappearing antiques, the neglected historical outbuildings. I discreetly saved incriminating emails and internal memos that I occasionally, and accidentally, came across. I carefully recorded conversations, where legally permissible in Virginia, as a one-party consent state, that detailed their callous disregard for the estate and their cynical plans for its exploitation. I watched them, day by painstaking day, with a mixture of sorrow and a cold, burgeoning fury, as they unknowingly, arrogantly, tightened the legal noose around their own necks. They treated me as a non-entity, a harmless, irrelevant relic of the past, which ironically was precisely the cover I needed to execute my plan. When I had amassed an undeniable, irrefutable mountain of meticulously cataloged evidence detailing their flagrant, systematic, and ongoing disregard for nearly every principle outlined in my hidden Addendum C, I made a discreet appointment to see Ms. Eleanor Vance. She was a highly respected, formidable litigator based in Richmond, renowned for her razor-sharp intellect, her unwavering tenacity, and her impressive track record in complex contract disputes and estate litigation. I had found her name through a trusted old university acquaintance who now practiced law. Ms. Vance, a woman whose calm demeanor belied a fierce courtroom presence, reviewed my extensive documentation, the doctored contract with its subtly altered, page 17, and my appended addendum C with an initially raised eyebrow that slowly, perceptibly transformed into a predatory, almost gleeful smile. "Ms. Ainsworth?" she said, after a long, thoughtful silence, her eyes twinkling with what I could only describe as professional admiration. "This is remarkably audacious, brilliantly conceived, and I am firmly convinced entirely legally enforceable. The urgent family meeting, as Aunt Carol had ironically and imperiously summoned it via a curt email, to discuss, I later learned the finalization of the West parcel sale, was convened in the grand, formal dining room of Magnolia Grove. It was a room they'd recently updated with garish, oversized crystal chandeliers that looked utterly out of place, beneath the room's historic hand-painted ceiling frescoes. Aunt Carol, Uncle Mark, and Jason were seated at the massive mahogany table, looking smug and self-important. Mr. Davies was also present, looking noticeably flustered and pale, as Ms. Vance, with my authorization, had already sent him a sharply worded preliminary letter outlining our legal position and demanding their immediate cessation of all managerial activities. "Clara," Aunt Carol began, her tone a masterclass in condescension, "we're so glad you could finally tear yourself away from your books." "Actually, Aunt Carol," I interjected, my voice surprisingly steady, imbued with a newfound confidence I hadn't realized I possessed. "I believe this meeting was called at my request, or rather, Ms. I gestured calmly towards my lawyer, who sat beside me, a picture of elegant composure. Ms. Vance, cool and utterly unflappable, addressed the suddenly wary trio. "Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Chandler, Mr. Jason Chandler, Mr. Davies. We are here today, as you know, to discuss Section 7, subparagraph D of the Ainsworth Family Management Agreement, executed on March 14th of last year." Blank, uncomprehending stares emanated from Carol, Mark, and Jason. Mr. Davies, however, began to perspire visibly, his already pale complexion taking on a distinctly greenish hue. Uncle Mark blustered, attempting to project an air of authority he clearly no longer felt. What utter nonsense is this? There was no addendum C of any material significance. A minor attachment, perhaps. Some sentimental notes from Evelyn. "On the contrary, Mr. Chandler," Ms. Vance said smoothly, her voice like chilled silk, as she produced her meticulously preserved copy of the executed agreement, which, of course, precisely matched the copy I possessed. "Addendum C is clearly and unambiguously attached to and incorporated by reference into page 17. Perhaps Mr. Davies," his face now ashen, fumbled with unsteady hands through the thick document that Uncle Mark reluctantly and with ill grace handed him. His trembling finger stopped on page 17. He slowly, almost fearfully, unfolded the appended addendum. His jaw dropped. I confess, I don't specifically recall this particular addendum being discussed or highlighted at length during the final review. Discussed or not, Mr. Davies, it was undeniably part of the legally executed and notarized agreement that bears your official stamp and signature, Ms. Vance stated, her voice now as sharp as a shard of ice. And my client, Ms. Ainsworth, has, over the past 6 months, compiled extensive, detailed, and irrefutable evidence demonstrating that the management committee, under your collective guidance, has systematically breached nearly every single principle outlined within that addendum. She then proceeded with devastating precision and eloquence to lay out our meticulously compiled evidence, item by damning item. Aunt Carol was sputtering incoherently. This is outrageous. A trick. She can't possibly do this. We are in charge here. According to the plain, unambiguous language of the contract that you all freely and willingly signed, Ms. Vance countered, her voice unwavering, any failure to uphold the clearly articulated principles delineated in Addendum C renders the entire management agreement null and void, ab initio. All rights, titles, interests, and sole managerial authority revert immediately and automatically to Ms. Ainsworth. Jason scoffed, a pathetic attempt at bravado. That's absolutely ridiculous. One stupid hidden sentence can't just undo everything we've accomplished. We'll fight this in court. You are, of course, entirely welcome to try, Mr. Chandler, Ms. Vance replied with a serene, almost pitying calm. However, Virginia contract law is remarkably clear on the enforceability of contingent clauses, particularly those explicitly incorporated by reference into a signed agreement. And given the overwhelming, indeed irrefutable body of evidence documenting your numerous and flagrant breaches, I suspect the Circuit Court will find decisively in Ms. Ainsworth's favor, and rather swiftly at that. Which, by the way, she added as a final devastating blow, would also make you collectively and individually liable for all of Ms. The fight, the bluster, the arrogant entitlement, visibly drained out of them like air from a punctured balloon. Mr. Uncle Mark stared blankly at the opposite wall, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. Aunt Carol looked as though she might spontaneously combust from sheer impotent rage. Jason just looked like a petulant, deflated child. Within a week, faced with the undeniable threat of immediate and aggressive legal action for substantial damages, not to mention a formal, detailed complaint against Mr. Davies to the Virginia State Bar for professional negligence and potential malpractice, they signed a comprehensive relinquishment document. This document formally acknowledged the validity and enforceability of Addendum C, conceded their breaches, and affirmed the immediate and complete reversion of all rights, titles, interests, and managerial authority over Magnolia Grove to me. They were legally mandated to vacate the premises of Magnolia Grove within 30 days, and were prohibited from setting foot on the property again without my express written permission. The very first action I took after the locks were changed, and their chauffeured SUVs had finally, blessedly, disappeared down the long Magnolia-lined drive, was to personally call each of the loyal, long-serving staff members they had so cruelly and callously dismissed. I rehired them all at their former salaries with full restoration of benefits and complete back pay for their unjustly lost time, a sum I was able to cover with considerable satisfaction from the generous annual stipend I had been meticulously saving, untouched, throughout their disastrous 6-month reign. I immediately and formally terminated the negotiations with the Development Corporation for the sale of the 50-acre west parcel, and initiated the complex but rewarding process of placing that pristine woodland under a permanent conservation easement, ensuring its protection for generations to come. I consulted with respected agricultural experts and local conservationists to begin the painstaking work of reversing the damaging vineyard practices and restoring the clear-cut forest land. Magnolia Grove still had its vibrant, resilient heartbeat. It had been bruised, its trust had been violated, its resources plundered, but it was, like my grandmother, like myself, profoundly and fundamentally resilient. Standing alone on the wide, sweeping veranda of the manor house, looking out over the verdant, rolling land that was now truly, unequivocally, and solely mine to protect and cherish, I could almost hear Grandmother Evelyn's voice, a wry, affectionate whisper in the rustle of the ancient magnolia leaves. "Be smart, child." I had listened, and in the quiet, carefully chosen words of a single hidden clause, Magnolia Grove, and my own fractured spirit, had found their hard-won, deeply satisfying liberation.